Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. Welcome to the webinar on why choose open source database on Azure. I'm Ananya Sharma, your host for the day. Allow me to guide you a bit about the tool to have an interactive experience during the webinar. Through the discussion, if you want to say something or interact with the presenter, please click on the hand raise button and we'll attend to you. You can also type down your question in the Q&A and chat section below, and it will be taken up in the scheduled Q&A pit stop. Let me introduce you to Mr. Shreyash Kambojkar, who is the head of marketing from Scalability Experts. Scalability Experts has been global leaders from the past 20 years in digital transformation, business intelligence, and consulting. Their deep industry experience and proven award winning methodology helps them deliver the best of their customer, resulting in improved business performance and operational efficiency. Scalability experts have their centers of excellence in Singapore, through which they cater to the APAC customers, and in Australia for their customers from Australia and New Zealand. With that, as we know that this pandemic has let us explore the new horizon for self development and adopt the culture of working from home. With this, I would also like to launch our first poll to understand that what we have done in this lockdown. So let me launch that up. I would encourage everyone to please participate and engage yourself as much as possible. Hope you are able to see the poll on your window. Yes, people are turning up. Please do let me know how you have spent your time during the lockdown. I know I have done a lot of surfing. I have done, engaged in my activities. So I have done, learned new social media campaigning and all. So I would encourage everyone, please put your best thoughts here. Another 10 seconds. I just quickly end up the polling and share the result. So majority of the people have said they have spent time with the family, and this is true that this pandemic has given us this opportunity to spend as much as time with our family. So with that, I will just hand over this to Shreyash to move ahead. Shreyash, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ananya. And it's great to see that a lot of people during the pandemic were able to spend some time with the family, which otherwise is kind of difficult considering the schedule and everything that we have. But moving ahead, I think let me just say a very good afternoon to everyone and hope you all are safe and healthy. So let me introduce to you Mr. Rajendra Gill. He's the speaker for today. He is the global CTO of Scalability Experts and has helped multiple small and large organizations across the world to modernize their data estate for the past 25 years. He is also a part of the partner advisory board with Microsoft. So I think without any further ado, let me hand it over to Raj. So Raj, I think you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Shreyas, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. Hopefully, you'll find the information very useful. So, I'm the global CTO for Scalability Experts, and my goal today is to really kind of talk about what we are seeing in the industry, which is a pretty rapid adoption of open source databases. Open source is a very big topic, and there are a lot of misconceptions customers have about going in that direction because in the industry, the commercial databases are very, very popular because that's how customers have gone in the past many years, like Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, DB2. Your organization may be also very heavy in that area in terms of relying on these commercial database products. However, in the last few years, open source databases have come a long way and they're ready for enterprise. And a lot of customers are actually deploying databases. And as you can see here from CEO for Red Hat, don't look at open source databases just to save money because there's no licensing fee attached to it, but it really is helping you get that incremental innovation. And the innovation comes from the fact that open source is a community product. So you're benefiting from the changes and enhancements that other developers are making to the product. So with that, let me just go through the agenda that we have for today, and then we can kind of yeah. So we wanted to focus on a few things. One is start with a customer scenario, and I'll discuss a recent customer that we work with that is adopting open source and very successfully, and how we help that customer identify open source as a great opportunity. And then we're going to focus on why Microsoft Azure. So cloud is a big thing for customers, and customers are looking to go to cloud very rapidly. And so if you want to go in the direction of open source databases, how can you leverage Microsoft Azure, and how Microsoft Azure is ready for open source databases, supporting open source databases in their cloud infrastructure. Then we're going to talk about the migration framework. So if you do decide to go in the direction of open source, what kind of tools you need, what kind of methodology you need. And again, we're going to talk about things that Scalability Experts has done for other customers and how we have helped them, and what are some of the lessons learned and areas that you can apply to your journey to the cloud and open source. And then obviously we'll have a conclusion and summary and open up for Q&A. We do have an offer at the end of this session, so please do stick around till the end for your journey to the open source, and you may want to take advantage of that as we speak. So let's start with the customer scenario. So here's a recent customer. It's a manufacturing customer in the Asia Pacific region that was looking at a pretty high cost of running their database environment. So as you can see here on the top left, this is an inventory of what they're currently running. So they're running Sybase, they're running DB2, and they're running primarily SQL Server. They're also running Oracle. So this customer had zero open source database adoption at this point. And their cost of ownership was very high. The licensing cost was also increasing every year. So they're very, very concerned about the fact that how can they streamline the cost of ownership. And they were also looking to go to cloud. So they wanted to take this opportunity to migrate to cloud and not only modernize, but also see if there are options to adopt open source. The other thing you can also see is that they have a pretty big non-production environment. So they have a development environment. So these are a number of instances that they have. They have production, they have UAT tests. So if you just look at the non-prod environment for these databases, that's a very, very high count. So, managing even non-prod environments for these databases can be very, very expensive. So with that in mind, we engaged with the customer and we basically, focused on just the Oracle piece because Oracle was a big piece of their expense. As you all know, Oracle licensing are very, very expensive. So they wanted us to look at Oracle and say, okay, can you help me understand if I want to migrate to Oracle, how can then I can use open source as a potential option? So we did an assessment, and this dashboard talks about how many databases we assessed. It gives you the breakdown of complexity of migration. So how many instances we found were low complexity, medium complexity, high complexity, and and also the applications, like which applications are talking to which databases, and primarily what I wanted to focus on is the adoption of what we were able to find. So we were able to find a significant portion of their deployment that could potentially go to open source. So for example, MySQL and Postgres. There were some that are probably recommended to stay on Oracle itself because they're running some proprietary Oracle applications. But there were quite a few that we were able to help customer identify they could run on open source. Now, with that said, it's not that you can migrate every database to the open source. So you have to really make sure that you do a proper assessment and understand whether or not those databases can be migrated and supported. And I'll talk about what that methodology is as we go through this session. But as you can see, we were able to identify at least a few of the applications that the customer was able to then migrate. And then there are several others that they could migrate to also SQL Server, right? So this is a kind of view we were able to give. Now, when we talk about the cost of ownership, right? The next question customer has is, okay, if I am looking at going to cloud, then what is the potential cost savings I will have? So here, just to give you some numbers, if you look at the customer staying on the Oracle environment, this was the yearly cost. It was almost 3 million pounds of cost per year. So that's a very, very high cost to just run the Oracle. This includes their licensing costs, their cost of management, hosting, support, all of that, right? And then if they were to migrate that to Azure, the cost was 2.4 million, so significantly less. And we estimated, one-time migration cost to get them to Azure was about 400,000. So if you look at that one-time cost, so they break even within the first year. So they save about 93,000 pounds by migrating to the Azure and adopting some of the open source environment. Now, when you're looking at migration, especially if you're looking at going to cloud, you also need to also understand the performance characteristics of your database environment. Oftentimes we find that database environments are over provisioned. So, for example, you may have a lot more cores or memory or I/O associated with your databases, and it's common more on Oracle and Sybase and DB2, and less on SQL Server. So here in this customer scenario, as you can see, we average CPU utilization was only 13%. The memory utilization was 51%. They do have some spikes that go to about 100%, but those were very less frequent. So average max memory utilization was 77%. So this is for the Hong Kong data center, and then for the Singapore data center, even less utilization. So one of the things we were able to factor is that once they migrate to Azure, they'll be able to do this optimization, right? So we assume like first year you would just migrate and you would stabilize. And the second year you would start doing some of the optimization, the right sizing, the consolidation. And we assumed about 10% or 20% the third year, and then 30% the fourth year, right? So we estimated about 30% savings could be accomplished by right sizing. Now, that's a quite significant number. If you look at 30% of $2.4 million, right? That's a significant number. Now, this was just an assumption because the customer wanted to spread out the optimization over multiple years, didn't want to take a lot of risk. But some customers want to start doing this optimization even in the first year so they can start benefiting from the savings. So the bottom line is that for this particular customer, if you just look at without doing any optimization, the savings after 3 years was about £1 million, and after 5 years was £2 million. And if we did add optimization, then the savings after 5 years literally doubled to £4 million. So this is quite significant, right? So the reason I wanted to show this example to you is that when you adopt open source and when you go to cloud at the same time, the savings that you can bring to your organization can be quite substantial. Okay, So with that case study in mind, let's dive into some of the technical challenges we face. So when you go to Oracle to PostgreSQL, for example, so this scenario was primarily PostgreSQL. There are some technical things that you may want to you will be encountering. Row ID is CTID. Blanks in Postgres are not treated as nulls. And there's a whole long list. This is not the entire list, by the way. This is just the top issues. Binary data types can be converted to byte EA. Synonyms are not supported in Postgres. Date is replaced with now. So there are some things that you have to be aware of in terms of how this conversion is going to happen, how the open source is going to really work, and is it really going to help you run your databases in better performance, and are they going to be any code compatibility issues, right? So, and then when you look at data types, this is an example of how the data types match up. So on the left side, you have the Oracle data types, and on the right side, you have the Postgres supported data types. And similar comparison exists for other open source databases like MySQL or MariaDB. And I'm not going to go through all of them in this session, but you can feel free to reach out to us and we'll help you understand what those differences are. So for example, if you're looking at going to MySQL, we can certainly help you understand how the migration to MySQL might be better, right? But oftentimes what we find is customers are really not sure which open source database really should make sense for them. And I'll talk about a little bit later in terms of how to approach that problem, right? So again, so data mapping is very important. How you migrate your queries is also very important. So let's do a quick poll in terms of database source options. So if I can bring up the poll. So I want to understand what open source databases, do you consider open source databases an option for your cloud migration strategy? So just want to understand, yeah, so everybody can see the poll, right? So basically, just yes or no, do you consider open source database as an option for your cloud migration strategy? Because if you are considering, and if you're not considering, then hopefully we can provide you some feedback in terms of how you should be looking at it. So many customers, I can tell you that when they think of open source, they're a little bit scared and worried about it. Say, hey, look, I'm not really sure. I don't have the skill set. My developers are all SQL Server or Oracle. How do I really, I'm not really sure if I want to take this journey. But the idea is that many customers have gone through that same process, and Microsoft and Scalability can help you in that journey make some of those decisions. So just feel free to, if you're not sure, just say not sure, or whatever that answer may be. All right, so let me end the poll, and then I'll share the hopefully. So it's a sending poll. Okay. So you can see the results. So interesting. So most of you are not sure, which is typically what we expect. And then that open source is a very new way to go about in terms of managing your databases. And but many of you are looking at going in that direction. So hopefully, majority of you are either looking at it or hopefully maybe convinced after this session that you should look at these. So so let's talk about how open source really works and why you should be considering open source as a potential target for your databases. So the first thing you need to understand is open source is a software that is distributed with its source code. So it's making available whatever the database you have, and you have the option to customize that database for your own specific needs. So for example, if you have user-defined data types and databases, you can actually create them and actually have compiled as part of your database application, and really kind of enhance that. You also benefit from the community enhancements, because there are a lot of people who are making modifications, and vendors like Microsoft, and I know AWS as well, and Google as well, are now supporting open source databases. So there's a very large adoption of those databases. And then if you look at the most popular open source databases, so in case you're not sure, hey, I'm not sure where I should go to Postgres or MySQL, and so forth. So this is a nice chart right here. Which gives you a breakdown of the MySQL and Postgres. So if you look at the MySQL and Postgres, that's almost 50% of the databases, open source databases that are deployed. So we are seeing some tick up in MariaDB, but and MongoDB as well. But if you look at this particular chart at the bottom right here, this gives you an idea of which is the database that is the fastest growing, right? So look at this Postgres right here, and look at this chart that is going really up, right? And all other databases here are going in the down direction. So as you can see, Postgres is really the fastest growing because it got a lot of community following. It's got a lot of vendors, enterprise vendors who are supporting it. So our recommendation is that if you're looking at an open source database for mission critical applications, then stick with either Postgres or MySQL, unless there's a specific application requirement for which you need either to MongoDB or MariaDB as a potential. So these are industry numbers from dbengine.com. So this is the source you can go and check out. They publish a lot of very interesting information about open source, so you can check out more on that site. Now, when you look at organizations that are committing to open source, then what is the things that we are seeing? So and some of you, a lot of you actually said you're not sure. So maybe this data is going to really help you. So 40% of the CIOs, more than 40% of the CIOs have open source as primary software strategy, right? So it's really huge. 60% of developers want to see cloud providers support open source, and that's why cloud providers like Microsoft Azure are adopting open source so rapidly. And then 90% of the enterprises deploy some sort of open source. Like this is not just database open source. This is open sources like operating system and serverless technologies and things like that. But it tells you that how big open source is. And then you also have this benefit of, as I mentioned earlier, right? So when you invest in open source, you have the community-driven quality. So you have other people who are enhancing the products continuously, and then you can benefit from those. And you also have the flexibility to modify that. There's no vendor lock-in, there's no licensing, and cost, and really allows you to take advantage of the best of the both worlds, right? Now, so that was so far in terms of the open source and why, and now we talk about why, like Microsoft Azure. So Microsoft Azure really has taken the open source database to the next level, right? So they provide fully managed open source databases. It helps you reduce your cost to market. The entire instances are managed and they're highly secured, so you don't have to invest in security and manageability. There's a significant improved performance and built-in intelligence, and also you can do a lot of the analytics with some built-in capabilities that are available, right? So what are those? So when it comes to Azure open source database services, they are, like I said, they support the community version of the databases. So whenever a new community version of the database is released, it's fully managed by Microsoft. So, like for example, backups, failover, high availability, replicas, everything is done by in the Microsoft Azure, and it is supported for MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MariaDB. And when you look at the cost, as I showed you in that customer example, the cost of ownership for this customer, how much they were able to save, um, it's actually quite substantial. So it's much cheaper to have open source running in Azure than having it run in your own data center and having to manage that for by yourself. So there's built-in intelligence. So Microsoft has actually built additional framework tools on top of the open source databases. So for example, you don't have to buy another licensing tool for monitoring and doing performance optimization. So there are built-in tools that will tell you which queries are running longer, where are the bottlenecks, and you can actually optimize your performance on the database. A lot of the DBAs are very interested in making sure that the database can be monitored. So there is built-in intelligence there, and also security. And lastly, and this is really exciting because one of the reasons you see Postgres growing very fast is that a lot of vendors have taken the Postgres and actually done enhancements on it. So for example, Microsoft has taken the Postgres version of the community Postgres and built out a scale-out version of that. So you can have hundreds of nodes. So it's called a hyperscale, Postgres hyperscale. So if you're looking at a mission critical application, then you can really scale that with Postgres scale-out option, and it's called Citus. So built-in security is very important, and that's provided, and integration with other uh, Azure services. All right, so if you look at the reason customers go to the cloud is primarily they want to take advantage of the analytics, right? Like machine learning, Power BI. Some of you may be using Power BI. ETL, data factory, cognitive services, IoT, and stuff like that. So the other question you may have is, okay, if I go down the direction of open source, is Microsoft Azure going to support all these capabilities? Will I be able to take advantage of that? And the answer is yes. So these are all the analytics capabilities, and Microsoft Azure supports that across data warehouse, different databases, SQL, Postgres, MySQL, and MariaDB, and you have HADR backup, security audit, isolation, all of that built in. You also have the on-demand scaling. So and then you can replicate the data in different regions if you want. And you can also have tuning and monitoring. So all of these capabilities are across all the databases, including Microsoft's commercial database, which is the SQL Server, right? And you can also use high-end storage if you want to improve performance. For example, you can use high-end Azure Compute as well, and they are available in many regions across the globe. Now, when you look at the administration and management, this is a slide that really gives you a good perspective of, okay, do I have to do more work if I go to Azure and I go to open source? The answer is no, because if you are running open source on-prem, then these are all the things that you're responsible for, right? You're responsible for HADR, database provisioning, patching and scaling, virtualization, data center management. Now, when you go to Azure, you have two options. You have the IaaS option and the PaaS option. And we obviously highly recommend going down the PaaS option, which is the fully managed option for open source. Now, if you do PaaS, then all of those responsibilities are now on Microsoft's prerogative. So that Microsoft actually manages in Azure all these aspects for you, like even patching, for example. So when a new version of the community database is available, how does it, how do you actually get it rolled out if you want to? Then point-in-time recovery and things like that. So all of that is managed by uh, by Microsoft. So if you are looking to go to cloud, you absolutely should look at PaaS as an option. So it's time for another poll. So I just want to quickly understand what kind of database are you um, uh, running. So let's let me just see if we can go here.
Before that, Rajendra, just to inform you that we have got one question in the Q&A section. So would you like to answer that right now, or do you want to take that at the Q&A pit stop time?
No, we can take it up later at the end because I'd
Sure,
like to get
sure.
this. So I'm not able to. Can someone bring up the last polling? I'm getting an error for that. The current databases. Oh, there you go. It came up. Yeah. So if you don't mind, which databases are you currently running? If you can please vote here. Just let us know what you're currently running. I see that a lot of people are using SQL. The SQL is fairly um, common. So
But PostgreSQL is very less as far as the data concerns are there, or the graph which says SQL Server is the top priority, but PostgreSQL should be the second one. But really, I'm shocked to see that Oracle is, most the second preferred on-premise infra, the databases which they are using.
yeah,
So
that
another
is
five
true.
seconds.
So yeah,
Yeah. So I just end the poll. So of course we have got SQL Server as the top option
yeah, very
selected,
interesting.
and
Yeah. So SQL Server comes with Enterprise and Standard Edition, and that's why there's opportunity for you to even look at migrating from SQL Server to open source if it makes sense. It's good to see some of you are running MySQL and Postgres as well, so that's good. So SQL and Oracle are typically the top databases anyway. So let's move on. I think we have a little bit more time to cover some stuff here that I think is going to be interesting. So, so far, we talked about why you should look at open source, and let's look at how you would go about doing that. So, I'm just using this as a framework that has worked for us in the past, and you can use something very similar to this, where you really need to have a proper data discovery and data collection, and then have a way to assess your environment so you can build a strategy for your open source databases. So like I said, you need to understand what is that you can migrate. So it's not just the database, right? It's also the application. So operating system, whether it's third-party app or in-house application. So it needs to be an entire full stack assessment, so end-to-end assessment of the environment. And once you do that, you also want to capture performance data because, as I showed you earlier, performance data is going to help you understand how much you can optimize, what is the sizing going to be in the target. Some of the data points that you want to collect a dependency, like application dependency. When you migrate a database, you want to make sure all of that is captured. What kind of architecture you have? Do you have a web-based application or a multi-tiered architecture? What are the compatibility issues? And what is the TCROI? And then, also for performance perspective, how do you measure performance once you migrate that database to Azure? So these are some of the, this is kind of a framework that I'm showing you. So specifically what data parameters you should be looking for. So this is what you want to look at: system configuration information. What versions are you running? Is it end of life? Operating system. Does the cloud support that operating system version? For example, Linux or Windows or mainframe. DB and application inventory details. So you want to know all the apps. And in databases, you have batch jobs, which is also should be considered as an application that run periodically, right? The other important thing is what are the features you're using. So many of you have said that you're using SQL Server and Oracle. Now, if you're using Enterprise Edition of SQL and Oracle, they come with specific features like partitioning or failover. mirroring or data guard. So you want to make sure that you identify what those features are, and when you migrate to open source, whether or not those features can be supported, or do you have to do rewriting of those. So it's not just a code conversion; it's also analyzing the features. Obviously, you want to collect performance data, and app dependency information. So here's a sample outcome. Once you have assessed that data, what is the information that you may get as a result, for example. uh, so just to give you an idea, when you're looking at migration or whether open source makes sense or not, these are some of the data points you want to look at. And then the next thing is you want to identify kind of your application compatibility. So here's a kind of a flow chart that helps you understand. So you have an application. First thing you want to know is whether is it a third-party application or in-house application. So if it's an in-house application, which means you have the access to your source code, it is a lot more easier to make these applications work on open source. But if it's a third-party application, the first thing you need to know is what databases that application supports. So if that application doesn't support open source, then it doesn't make sense, right? For you to even consider, because you don't want to lose supportability of that application. So first thing you need to know from your vendor is whether or not it supports that particular open source databases. Now, if the vendor does support that open source databases, the next thing you want to look at the code compatibility and the feature parity. These are two most important things. So as I showed you earlier from that example, some of the issues we found in converting the code, some of the data type conversion issues, and also some of the features that you may want to look at rewriting when you migrate to, so many customers just focus on code conversion, and that's not the only thing. You want to look at features as well, because if you're using a feature in Oracle or SQL Server that is not supported in Postgres, for example, then you will have a lot of challenges, right? So you have to have a proper methodology in designing your approach to migrate to your open source environment. So the different steps from a high level are basically, you want to do an assessment, as I mentioned earlier, use a framework. Obviously, Scalability Experts offers a framework, so we can certainly help you there. Collect the data, analyze that data, identify the dependencies, and then what are the compatibilities, what are the risks, collect all the metadata, all the telemetry information. User logs, so this is very important. You collect the user logs so you can replay them and you can understand what the performance impact is. And then, you want to do a POC. Maybe, you want to migrate a piece of your database and application, and then test it out, make sure it's performing correctly, it's integrating correctly. How are you going to do the rest of the migration? So you're going to have a migration strategy and a migration plan. Can you use any automation? Because if you keep doing manual conversion, it can take a long time, and it can have a lot of it's very error prone, human error prone, right? So once you have done the migration, the next is the optimization. So as I showed you earlier, with that customer example, we were able to identify up to 30% optimization potential, because once you go in cloud, you're paying you're going to a pay as you go model. So if you can reduce your cost in cloud by optimizing, then you can certainly benefit from those cost options. So once you have done that optimization, then you can basically make sure that you have the governance, how you're going to manage security, have the security wrapper. So all of these are now taken care by Azure for you. So you don't have to really spend a lot of time there. Just enable those tools for governance and security and monitoring, and then you're good to go. So at a high level, this is the framework. It's not just the database, right? So you have to look at infrastructure. You have to look at storage, compute, memory, data center, as well as your database, as well as your application. So it's an end-to-end approach that you need to take, even though you're migrating just the database, right? So here's an example of once you do the assessment, what a potential output might look like. So this is for a customer. So we have actually obfuscated some of the information here. So you have your production instance name. What is the complexity of migrating that database? So this was primarily an Oracle database source, and what the application name is. And this is the target DB. So these, for each of that Oracle database, what is the target database that we are recommending? So some of them are PostgreSQL. There's one MySQL. Some others are SQL Server, but it looks like most of them are PostgreSQL, right? Because this customer probably wanted to adopt Postgres as much as possible. So this gives you the object count of how much conversion, how many objects are you converting, and then how much is the storage of the database that you are converting, and what are the number of compatibility issues, database compatibility issue, as well as application compatibility issue. So that's another area that you need to pay attention, because it's very common to have SQL code which is embedded in the application. So if you just assess the database and say, oh, I can just convert my database objects and I'm good to go, that's not going to work, right? Because the application code that is compiled within the application doesn't sit in the database. So you have to look at application dynamic SQL, and then enterprise features. Like I said, you want to know what features are you using. So here in this customer, they were mostly using enterprise edition. There are quite a few features that they were using, and those need to be converted, or we need to identify the equivalent in the target environment. And the last but not least, what is the automation so that you could use? Because when you're migrating on a large scale, you want to make sure that the cost of migration is not very, very high. So for low complexity and medium complexity, as you can see, the automation is very high, up to 95% and up to 75%. But as you get into the high complexity area, it is, you can't automate everything. You may have to do some manual effort. Um, so this is the visibility that we provided to this particular customer, and they really like the fact that we were able to break it down really into chunks of what needs to be done, and what's the low-hanging fruit, and what should be migrated first, and what is the automation that we could use, etc. Um, One thing I wanted to focus on is performance, and this is very, very important, because performance is a big concern, because when you go from Oracle or Postgres to Postgres, for example, customers are very concerned whether their database is going to perform very well. So in this example, you have the on-prem database, and we capture the user activity from production, and then we migrate the database to Postgres, for example, and we replay it. Now, once we replay, we can actually measure the performance, query by query, 15-minute intervals, and see how the databases are performing. And I can tell you, this is a really good way to check, almost 90 to 100% of all the issues that potentially might be causing any performance problems. Now, here's a dashboard that gives you an example of what that looks like, right? So here I have an application, and then I actually chose a server, a VM. This VM is running these applications, and then so this is the server name. So this is the application, and then these are the workloads, and then pre-migration in milliseconds and post-migration in milliseconds. So this is on-prem, and this is in Azure on after migration. And then what this tells you is function by function, what is the percentage performance improvement. On an average, there's 32% performance improvement from on-prem, which is great. The other thing you want to also look at is, because when you go to cloud, you go to a pay-as-you-go model, that if you're getting better performance, is it because you have over-provisioning compute? Because if you are, then you're actually paying more for that performance. So these charts at the bottom tell you that that's not the case. So for example, the on-prem CPU utilization is higher than the Azure CPU utilization. The IOPS are going to be pretty much the same. There's not going to be much difference in IOPS. So disk reads and writes are very similar. And then memory utilization is also less. Now is what's going to make you happy, right? So not only I'm getting 32% on an average better performance, but I'm actually getting that at lower CPU utilization and lower memory utilization. And I can tell you the reason we saw this for this customer is because they had a very old legacy hardware, and in Azure, we were using modern PaaS instances that with the latest chips and faster storage. So definitely that made a difference. But at least you have an idea of how much you're going to be spending. So here you're actually spending less to get more performance, which is exactly what you want. All right. So how do you then make a live migration, right? So here's a scenario. So you have on-prem database, you're capturing the logs, and you're shipping the logs to the Azure environment, and you're replaying them. So this allows you to have a side-by-side environment in production. So and you're shipping the logs, and you're migrated the database and the data, and you're actually checking if everything is working fine, right? So that's good. Now you can keep this running for several weeks, and even months if you want, until you're happy that your performance and compatibility is all good. And once you're satisfied, you can disconnect your on-prem system, and you can reconnect your make your Azure environment live, right? So this is what's called a commercial pilot. So this is really good because this allows you to de-risk and really do a real-time failover to so you decommission on-prem and recommission it on. So this is a case study of a leading financial firm where we used this commercial pilot because they were running a mission critical database. We migrated to Postgres. Performance was a big concern for them. So we were able to provide this side by side comparison. And once they were happy with the performance, then they switched over. So if you're interested in learning more about this case study, you can obviously reach out to us. Very successful deployment on PostgreSQL, and they were getting low page load times, on demand scalability, a 40% reduction in cost. That's quite substantial, right? And so here's a kind of the journey summary for you. So when you look at open source, you obviously will look at a lot of savings, obviously, and optimization potentials are there. Don't forget the optimization. That's a big area where you can also have cost saving. Then you can also use containerization of your application to have additional savings. You can look at your top queries, apply data compression to do more cost savings. So if you have queries which are taking a lot of compute, you can optimize them once you're migrated. And then you can also optimize by utilization. So some applications are only busy 8 a.m. To 6 p.m. Some may be from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m. Some may be from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. So you can kind of take the profile of your applications and then consolidate them into instances. So that way, if you're running an instance 24 by 7, you're utilizing that entire 24 hours for usage. So that's really good. And then obviously consolidation is a big area. So this can add another 50% of savings on top of just licensing cost reduction based on the experience we've had and the customers that we have worked with. All right. So with that, I wanted to hand it over to Shreyas, and maybe we can get some Q and A. And Shreyas, you can talk about some of the offers we have for the audience, and then we can get into some Q and A. Over to you, Shreyas.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful session, Raj, and it was quite informative for sure. So I'll just quickly take you on the steps ahead, and then we can open the forum for Q&A. So if you're wondering, like how can you plan your journey to cloud, and if open source is one of the options, or if you're considering any other options for that matter, we can always help you plan your way, plan your journey. So here are the three offers that we can suggest. The first one is definitely a one-to-one consultations with our experts from Scalability. Second is a cloud readiness assessment. This is a sponsored assessment in which you would be able to understand your current on-premises infrastructure and how you can move to cloud. And basically, it will be like a report if you're ready to move to cloud. And then there is a commercial trial, as Raj explained in the previous slides. This is also going to help you understand, if you move a few identified databases or apps to Azure, then we will be able to analyze how the user activity and performance data is post and pre-migration. So that it will be like a proof of concept before you actually decide to move to cloud. So these are the three offers that we have. You can reach uh, to us if you need any of this or any other help for that matter. Right now, I'll just open the forum for Q&A, and yeah. Let's go ahead.
So please type in your question. There was one question that I just responded, whether the file server share is part of the data migration. Yeah, absolutely, because a lot of times databases use file systems to store data. In SQL Server, you have file stream. In Oracle, you have file table file data type. So when you're migrating, there may be scenarios where you have to look at where the data is stored, and using that analysis, you have to consider migrating to the using doing the file share migration as well. So if you have any questions, please type in. We are here to answer them. Um, we have about 5 minutes, Shreyas. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. We have 7 minutes to be precise. So, any one of you who have any questions related to the session today, or anything related to moving to cloud or adopting open source, we are here to help. So you can just go ahead and drop your questions in the comment section, and we would help you.
there is an email here, info@scalabilityexperts.com. You can always reach us out there. And Shreyas will follow up in terms of just understanding um, your requirements, and reach out to us directly if you have any other questions. Anything around. I saw that a lot of you are using SQL Server, so SQL Server migrations are much easier than Oracle migrations are, and MySQL and PostgreSQL both are really good target. Obviously, Standard Edition is easier compared to Enterprise Edition. For Enterprise Edition, we have to look at what features you're using and stuff like that, and then build a strategy around it. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, always keep in mind that when you're migrating database, it's not just the database, right? You have to look at the entire ecosystem. You have to look at your server configuration. You have to look at performance data. That's very, very important. And then you also look at application interaction, like what the dependency are, how many dynamic SQL you have. There's so many examples I can give you where, we have been engaged after the customer has been on the migration journey. They're trying to do this migration on their own, and they're very successful in some areas, but then when they look to take it live, they were having all kinds of issues, and often those issues arise from the fact that they didn't do a thorough assessment up front, which is the offer Shreyas was talking about, is make sure that we can do a proper cloud readiness assessment. So once you do the assessment, you have all the data, then you can build your strategy and your decision on, hey, which open source I should go to. Does this migration make sense to me or not, right? Um, and then you can define your strategy a lot more specifically and accurately. Um, the other thing, obviously, is the commercial trial. This is really a big deal because performance is going to be a number one concern, performance and security, and it's very difficult to measure performance because it's very hard to capture your production workloads and then replay them. Um, well, in a UAT environment. So the way we do it is we capture the trace, we log it, and then we convert it, and then we replay them. So that way you can get an apples to apples comparison of how the performance is on prem and how much the performance is on Postgres or MySQL, and then you can do a comparison of the performance and understand and have confidence that this is actually going to work correctly for you. Anyone to type in any questions?
I would encourage every audience to please type down your questions if you have any query that can be addressed right now. I think we should wrap up the session. And I would like to thank everyone. Rajendra, thank you for the lovely session today. And you've been a great instructor. And Shresh, thank you for being so responsive and putting all the things in place. It was wonderful session, and the audience were very well responsive. Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye. Bye bye. Thank you.